I said last time, and we were texting about it in the church chat this morning or afternoon as well, that I'm talking about Genesis 1 through 3 today. So there'll be a lot to get through. This is part of, but I'm not going to talk about all of it. Yeah, but this is part of we're starting after Easter a series through the book of Hebrews, and kind of interwoven with that is the first sermon in the series that I'm preaching today is I think we're calling it Faith of Our Fathers, but it's just, well, you'll get the idea. But first, every communicator's nightmare is not knowing their audience. So one of many, I guess the other one is the classic, I'm up here and we're all in our underwear or something like that. But that's nightmare for me actually. But yeah, but the other nightmare is not knowing your audience. So I want to find out, what is your relationship to the Old Testament? And so I just wanted to throw out some questions, just yes or no, give me a show of hands, and there's no wrong answer, except the dishonest one, I guess. But and this is not to embarrass anybody, so it's just just say yes or no, or if you do feel embarrassed, then just don't raise your hand. That's cool. So here it is. Which do you read more, the New Testament or the Old Testament? How many for New Testament more? How many for Old Testament more? A lot of you are kind of both, huh? Well, what if we exclude Psalms and Proverbs? Do you change your answer? How many would change your answer? Yeah, one brave soul is willing to admit it. Any books in the Old Testament that you can't remember when the last time was you read them? Any that you've never read? Any books in the Old Testament that you find intimidating? Yeah. Yeah. Yep. I think that for a lot of Christians, the Old Testament is kind of like a weird uncle that you hear a lot about, but not mainly when he comes around for like the occasional family reunion. Other than that, not mentioned so much. This weird uncle has stories about strange experiences in faraway places, and he's sometimes oddly funny and other times kind of borderline inappropriate. And you're being told maybe I'm that uncle. You're being told that this person is a part of your family, but he just always seems a little unfamiliar. So, like, maybe you resonate with that, or some parts of that, or maybe all of it. But I think that a lot of times we're really at home in the Gospels and the letters, and we're okay with Psalms and Proverbs. And we occasionally consult the Revelation, like during the COVID pandemic or when Hamas attacked Israel. And maybe we have a passing familiarity with the history books in the Old Testament from, our days in children's church, if you grew up that way. And for the rest of it, maybe you have a few favorite verses out of half of the rest of the books. That's kind of like taking kind of a larger poll than just in this group over the years, kind of just getting that idea. That's kind of my impression. But I want to tell you, this is normal. So, if it worries you, don't let it worry you. Most of you don't look worried. Every generation, I heard a theologian say this, or a biblical scholar of some kind, except I lost who it was, so I just remember the quote. Every generation of believers has to figure out what to do with the Old Testament. It's really, Jesus is awesome, and we can get on board with Paul and Peter and James and John, but got to figure out what to do. What should we do with the Old Testament? So, we're gonna in this faith of our fathers, that's gonna be some of the topic, just the Old Testament, give you some framework for it. And the first thing you need to know is that the Bible is a story. I don't mean that it's made up when I say it's a story. I just mean that it's like a narrative, right? It has some characters, it has a setting, and it has a plot. And there's an overarching narrative to the Bible. Why is this important? I think a lot of us have grown up thinking of it as a theological handbook, where you go to figure out categories like, who is God? What is man? What is sin? Who is Christ? What is salvation? Those kind of things. And it's important to know that it's a story. Our intuition to go to the Bible for those things is right. Like, it does have things to say about God and man and Christ and salvation and sin and all that. But the way it tells us that is through a story, not through a theological handbook kind of format, a reference book, like a dictionary where you look up right? Think of a cookbook, and if you pick up the cookbook and you think it's a grocery list, will you get out of it what you're supposed to get out of it? Or if you pick up a grocery list and think it's a cookbook, will you get out? They both have the same kind of, there's a list of ingredients there, a list of things to get, but if you approach a cookbook thinking it's a grocery list or vice versa, you get the wrong thing out of it. So the Bible is a story. And to understand this story, you got to understand the beginning, right? We love the New Testament, but the New Testament is a fulfillment of the Old Testament. And to understand the Old Testament, I'm not saying that you can't understand anything about it if you don't have all these little pieces in place, but to really progress in your understanding of the Old Testament, you have to understand the Pentateuch. And to understand the Pentateuch, you have to understand Genesis. And to understand Genesis, you have to understand Genesis 1 through 3. It's all there encapsulated. And so much of the rest of the Bible is expounding and riffing off of those themes just in new and creative ways. So, we're going to talk about Genesis 1 through 3. Like I said earlier, or alluded to earlier, this is the study of many lives. And it would be the preaching of many sermons. So I'm not going to do either. Fortunately, even though I only have one life, I have lots of brothers and sisters in the faith for the last 20 centuries. Well, probably more than that if you include the Hebrew scholars, Israelite scholars, that have studied this. And so we get to benefit from what they've discovered. Now, I promise that I promise that you'll probably learn something new tonight. So I would wager that most of you will learn something new tonight. A lot of what I'm going to talk about is not that long ago that I learned it, the last year. And so if you're like a Bible scholar or a Bible nerd or approaching one, maybe you're not in that category of you'll learn something really new today. But I think most of you will. So even though Genesis 1 through 3 might be really familiar to you and you feel like, okay, here we go, what's he going to talk about? I just want to ask you to, especially if you're someone who kind of tends to have the glazed eye look when you think somebody's talking about something you're already familiar with, just keep tuned in, stick with me. You might be going through things you know, but there'll be some other things you don't know. And this will set us up for what story we're in. Okay? All right. So, went back to the beginning. Hey, it worked. All right. So here's the beginning. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. So we know there's, in that first verse, here's what we're going to talk about. God creating the heavens and the earth, or the sky and the land. We find that someone named God is there, and that there's also a spirit of God. Okay? And I would just want to, you guys know the days and the, and a lot about that. I'm not going to jump through every little thing. I should have said this earlier, I'm just going to touch down in a few spots as we go through Genesis 1 through 3, okay? So don't expect like an exhaustive thing. But I want to look at this through this lens of formless and empty. The Hebrew phrase is right there, tohu vavohu. It kind of rhymes, tohu vavohu. And the idea, the formless and empty, to kind of like amplify the meaning under that, formless means like disordered and chaotic, right? There's not nothing. There's something there, right? The darkness and the face of the deep, some deep kind of chaotic waters. Something's there, but it's chaotic. It's disordered. That's what formless means. It's disorganized. And then empty means more strictly uninhabited, like there's no life there, right? So and this is another quote that I lost the author to, but I'll say it's not mine. There's a scholar who is trying to capture that kind of idea of disordered and uninhabited, but still keeping like this tohu vavohu rhyme thing going on. And that phrase that he came up with was wild and waste, and I kind of like it. In the beginning, it was wild and waste. And so what God does next is deal with both of those things, right? Days 1 through 3, he's dealing with the fact that it's formless, that it's disorganized and chaotic. And so he's organizing it. First, he separates day from night. That's organized, right? Then day 2, he separates the waters above from the waters below and creates an expanse called the sky. Day 3, he separates the water from the land and causes the water to gather in one place and the land in another place. He's dealing with the tohu part, that it's been disorganized and chaotic, and he's organizing it. And then in days 4 through 6, he's dealing with the vohu. Va means and. He's dealing with the empty part, the uninhabited part of this. The world was formless and empty. It was wild and waste. It was disordered and uninhabited. So he creates this order in days 1 through 3, and then in days 4 through 6, he's populating each of those spaces. The day and night, well, he puts the sun to rule the day, the moon to rule the night. And on day 5, the birds to rule the expanse of the sky, and the fish to rule the sea. And then on day 6, he creates the land animals to inhabit the land, right? He's putting life into each of these realms that he just created. And then the capstone is people. And people are, as we know, are kind of placed above all that, right? So that's what's going on. And then, of course, day 7 is when God rests. And rest is, and the seventh day has to do throughout the whole Bible with a lot of things. But here it's the idea of completion, right? It's done. He's taking his rest. It's like the idea of a king has taken his throne, has ascended to the throne, and now he sits down and he is at rest, right? And so that's what God's doing on day 7. And of course, we're meant, there's no evening or morning statement about day 7. The idea is that from then on, day 7 continues, or let's call it the 8th day, right? That we're supposed to be, us humans are supposed to be just reigning with God, reigning the world as his representatives, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a second. And so, yeah, that's Genesis 1 through verse 3 of chapter 2. Now, chapter 2 retells the story it's not. It's kind of retelling it from another perspective. Chapter 1 has this kind of grand panoramic scale, right? God is there, and he's transcendent, and he's speaking to create, right, in this kind of grand scale. And then chapter 2, it's more focused, and God there is portrayed as having like these human-like qualities, right? He does things like forms and plants and fashions, right? And so they're both the creation story told from kind of a little bit different viewpoints. Is this making sense? Have I lost anyone? Okay, I got one thumbs up. Yeah. So, here's backing up a little bit to the end of that was what I alluded to earlier. Here's God talking about creating the humans. And he says, let's make humankind in our image and according to our likeness, and let them rule, right? And then there's this little poem. So God created humankind in his image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them. And then he blessed them. He blessed them to rule and to fill the earth and to multiply and to subdue it. We talked about this back in December a little bit, if any of this is ringing a bell. The word tselem is the word for image. I highlighted in that previous slide there. Image, that's the word tselem. Every time you see image highlighted there. And it's a standard Hebrew word for an idol statue. So it's saying that here is these representatives of God, right? This is why, for example, Israel was not to make any idols, any images of God. One, because you can't really contain God in an image. It's a little bit sacrilegious. And two, there was already a whole bunch of images of God running around. And this is very different than the cultural thought around them. Right? The ancient Near East they had this idea of, this image being an idol statue. That's like, everybody knows this, right? All their neighbors would have known this. But in the ancient Near Eastern peoples, like the Syrians, the Babylonians, the Egyptians, the Hittites, whatever, all those guys, all those ites, the image is the god. That's why they take care of it and everything, and they put it in the temple, But the kings would also claim that they were the image of the god, and that's why they had divine right to rule. But just them, right? And then the Hebrew people come along, and their God is saying, no. First of all, you're just a representative. You aren't gods, none of you. And secondly, every human is a representative. Like not just the rich, not just the powerful. Like you got to catch how different this is from everybody around them. Because the name Adam is the standard Hebrew word for human. His name is human. It's the same word. Sometimes they say Adam, and sometimes they say man or mankind, just kind of depending on the context, translators. It's the same exact word in Hebrew. Adam, that's right. And so they're saying the humans are the image. And you got to realize that, like, the Babylonian mythology, for example, their mythology was about this, the chief god is a guy named Marduk, and in their mythology, the gods were getting tired one time of like just having to do things for themselves, and so they took this one god and they killed him, and his blood that poured out on on the ground formed this kind of bloody clay, and out of that they formed humans to be this slave race for them. And onto that scene, the Hebrew people are saying, no, what's actually true is that we're made with glory and honor. We were made to be representatives. This is a big deal. We've grown used to the idea now, maybe, but this is a big deal. So, I already talked about this. Genesis 2 retells this creation story, right? In Genesis 1, God just speaks and things happen, and it just really emphasizes that he's transcendent, that he's just over all this, just all this amazing stuff he's doing, like creating light and separating day from night. I mean, that's pretty awesome. But Genesis 2 kind of tells it from this other standpoint, and we already talked about that. God is forming, right? It says that he formed, he caused water to grow up out of this dry and dusty place, and he formed a man, a human. Later it says that he planted a garden, he put the human there. Later it says that he fashioned the woman, right? So it's the word fashion is like a word that has to do with building. It's not with clothing. Yeah. So it's just told from this different vantage point. If that's ever, I say that just in case that's ever confused you. Like, what's the heck is going on with the two beginnings? It's just told from a different vantage point. You guys still with me? Okay. Now, one thing that chapter 2 tells us is that we're priests. So watch this, right? It says that there's this land called Eden. Eden means delight. And in Eden, God plants a garden. And at the center of a garden are these two trees, the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. There's this three-tiered structure. And at the center is where the humans can go to get life. They can go to God for knowledge about good and evil. You're supposed to go to God for it. Can you think of anything else where God's presence is that has 3 levels? How about outer court, holy place, most holy place? Everybody, you're welcome to shout it out. So, God plants this garden, and he takes the Adam, the human, and he sets him in the garden to work and to keep it. And work and keep are standard vocabulary for the priests and the Levites, and I put 2 examples there. These are in Numbers 3, 5 through 8. You see it in a few other places in Numbers, sometimes in separate verses, but sometimes like this in the same verse. A little bit in Deuteronomy too. It's the same group of words about working and keeping. So the humans are placed in this cosmic temple, the idol statues in the temple, and this may sound weird to think of it and talk about it this way, very metaphorical, very whatever. Just realize that though that this is how the author of Genesis is telling us what's going on. Like this isn't made up by me or by just like one scholar or two. If this seems weird or new to you, this is how the Bible works. It's using these. This is why Genesis 1 through 3 is just foundational to understanding the rest. The humans are supposed to be ruling and reigning the world and extending out from the garden, extending God's order and life out from the garden to the rest of the world. That's what subduing is. That's what they're supposed to be doing. As his representatives, they're supposed to be expanding that. And it's like they're priests in a temple as well, serving, right? Working and keeping. And just like he's supposed to work and keep the garden, later on that same language gets used about the Levites and the priests. Observe there is the same underlying word as keep. And you see the other works and keeps. You with me so far? Okay. So, a couple more things on that. You know, at the beginning here, heaven and earth, and if any of you remember, like, we've showed it maybe a couple times, but it's been a long time ago, years ago probably. But the Bible Project has a great video that talks about heaven and earth and just explains it graphically, really awesome. But like heaven, the skies is God's space, right? And earth is human space, and sometimes the two overlap, and they overlap at temples and at mountaintops, stuff like that. Originally, they're overlapping kind of completely. And at the end, same thing, new heaven, new earth. There's no temple there. There's no light because the Lamb is the light. There's no lamps, because the Lamb is the light. But between those two bookends, that's what the tabernacle and the temple are supposed to be, recreations of that. It's the story telling what's the plot conflict? How do humans get back to Eden? How do we get back to that state? And so the tabernacle, that's why it's decorated and embroidered and stuff with leaves and fruit and plants, right? And cherubim, these beings that are where God is. That's why the temple and that's why the tabernacle before it were decorated with all those things. All right? Still with me? Is it getting weird? Yeah? All right. So, here's the next thing I want to touch down on. The whole bit about the woman and the man. You guys are familiar with this verse, I'm sure. Yahweh God said, "It is not good that the man is alone." It's the first not good in the whole creation, right? At this point, right? God's been saying everything's good, and everything's very good. And now he's like, wait, something that's not good. This man is alone. I will make for him a helper as his counterpart. The Hebrew for that is the ezer kenegdo. And you see there a whole bunch of translations. Most of them stick with help. You see that that's what ezer, they're translating ezer as help or helper. And after that, there's quite a bit of variety. If you're ever reading your Bible and you compare translations and you see a lot of variety like that, it's because the translators are trying to get at something. Usually they're all translating, they're getting at a piece of what the underlying word means, but it's just hard to put it in one word. And by the way, here and in a little bit later, I'm going to be talking about some like translation issues, right? But meaning like places where the English translation is like, man, it could be better, or there's been like an error that we've kind of just kept because it's familiar or stuff like that. But I just want to say from the outset that I'm not ragging on any English translation. Guys, we live in a blessed time where we have so many. There's people that don't have any, that have one, have two. Look at all the translations we have. And every single one of them is trying to faithfully represent what's there from some objective or standpoint, right? Some of them are trying to go more literal, some are trying to go more interpretive, but they're all trying to faithfully represent that, even the message. No laughter, okay. So, even the Amplified. The Amplified is your message, I see. So, when just keep that in mind when I'm talking, okay? That I don't want to come across as ragging on any of the translations. It's a blessing, and they're all trying to do something that's difficult. Okay, so, but the Ezer Kenegdo translations, especially the one for Ezer as a help, has something to be desired. And who can forget, of course, the King James, a help meet for him, and there is a space there. Man, I didn't know that. I've always heard help meet as one word, because I didn't really grow up reading the King James. I grew up reading the Reina Valera, and I'm a missionary kid, for those of you who don't know. So I grew up reading a Spanish Bible. But I always heard help meet, and I thought, okay, one word, right? Now that I understand, this is just an aside. I'll try not to go into a rabbit trail here. But now that I know that it's two words, I actually understand what they're trying to say. And the meet in that definition meant something in the 1500s and 1600s when the King James was translated. But that's the thing, right? That's 400 years ago. And meanings of words have changed. And so we don't know what that means anymore. So the Kenegdo part is, they're all getting at something that has to do with that. Someone who is corresponding, who is, the same but different, right? They're companions, they're equals, they're comparable, but they're different. They're opposite, not in the standpoint of black versus white, or high versus low, those kind of words that are opposites. But opposite as far as like someone, it's not me, it's someone who's in front of me, right? Who's standing opposite me. So that's not so bad. Ezer, though, helper, not the best translation for me. Here's a few other passages that use the word Ezer. So let's see if we can figure out, like, what if you read these passages and you didn't know what Ezer means. Let's say it's not help. What word would you put there? Or what kind of meaning do you think that the word that goes there has? Like, what kind of nuance or range of meaning? Right? Exodus 18:4 is talking about Moses' second son, and that he named him Eliezer, because the God of my father was my Ezer and delivered me from the sword of Pharaoh. Eliezer, El means God and Ezer means something. And so he named him Eliezer because Elohim was his Ezer. And so what word would you put in there? Salvation. Yeah. Look at the Psalms. But I'm poor and needy. O God, hasten to help me. You are my Ezer and my deliverer. Ezer and deliverer, that kind of salvation. Salvation means rescue. In less churchy. We all know what salvation means, but it's not a word that I usually use outside. I might say rescue, right? Outside meaning away from people, church people. And of course, Psalm 120, and these are just three examples, there's others, but Psalm 121, right? I lift up my eyes to the mountains, where will my Ezer come? My Ezer comes from the Lord. Salvation is kind of a good one, rescue. Here's just my suggestions. Because well, you'll see why I'm suggesting these. Succor, which is a word probably none of us use anymore. I don't use it. Which is why I also put relief up there. But those are the definitions of succor and relief, right? Some kind of help in a time of hardship or distress, or bringing someone relief, like, man, I just wish I had some relief from this toothache, right? Quicker than I could say Ambisol. It's bringing some kind of removal of something that's distressing. So that's the help. I mean, rescue and salvation kind of fit into that, right? You're in some kind of distress, and you need some help to get out of there. It's not like, hey, I need some help putting up some fence pickets. Like I needed another pair of hands kind of help. It's like I need some help because I'm in a pickle, I'm in a bind. What was the pickle or bind the man was in? What's that? He was alone. Yeah. God was like, that's not good. He is suffering. He needs some assistance, some relief from being alone. And so he said, all right, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to put him in this divine like stupor and fix that. And he says, the author of Genesis says, after the man, God fashions the woman, brings her to the man, and he says, she shall be called woman, for she was taken out of man. And then the author of Genesis says this: a man shall leave his father and his mother and cling to his wife, and there'll be one flesh. So I put at the end there why and what this is telling us, right? God is a community of love, a Trinity, right? The Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, an eternal community of love. And his representatives, his images, should be a community of love. He wants to commune with them, but he wants them to commune with each other, because that's what he's doing, communing with himself, kind of. I know it's weird to think about. But just like there's, in the Godhead, there's more than one, but there's still one, humanity is the same way. There's more than one, but there's still one. Right? There's the male and female, but there's still one. This is why in that earlier poem in Genesis 1, God created man in his image. In the image of God, he created them male and female. He created them. So it's not just a person that images God, but it's one, humanity, the Adam, and two, it's the man and the woman together. Like, they can't image God without each other. Okay? You'll see why this is, why I'm emphasizing this. Having that in mind just explains a lot of things, and other things that I've been talking about, but explains a lot of things in the rest of the Bible. But I do have a point about it. Now I kind of skipped over this a little bit just to get to the end, but let's go back. This is where he puts him in a deep sleep, kind of like this divine stupor kind of idea. Like it's the same words used like when Abraham fell asleep and he dreamt about the Exodus and stuff. Anyway, he caused a deep sleep to fall on the man, and while he slept, he took one of his tzelah, is the Hebrew word, translated rib in every translation I could find in English. I didn't look at all of them. There's a lot, but I looked at a couple dozen. And then he closed it up and he fashioned, that fashioned is like a building type of word in Hebrew. He fashioned it. And I mentioned, we talked about Adam. I didn't talk about this earlier, though. Adam, there's an article, ha, in front of it. So the Adam, right? the whole way. So that's kind of how you know it's not just talking about like a person. This person is representing like the entire human race, right? Because he's the first one. But it's the Adam, the man, Ha-Adam. And there is a wordplay because he makes him out of the ground, right? He takes the water that he causes to the springs that he causes to burst out of the ground, and he forms the Adam out of the Adamah. The Adamah is the ground, the Hebrew word for ground. So there's this wordplay, the Adam from the Adamah, and or the human, the man, whatever, is Ha-Adam, and so I put another verse there, just one example in Exodus, where that word Selah is also used, and I gave you the answer at the bottom already too, but side is the most common translation of that word, and it is an architectural term, like the side of a building, most of the time, and that's what's in our English translations in Exodus. You'll make 5 bars of acacia wood for the frames on one side of the tabernacle, and 5 from the second side of the tabernacle. Now, if you talk about a person's side, that could be his rib, but it could also just be like, I don't know, it could be his arm. I mean, I don't know. So I see why they put rib, but I also don't see why they put rib. He just took one of his sides and took something, closed up the flesh from it, and fashioned the woman out of it. So, he caused a deep sleep to fall upon the man, Ha-Adamah, or the Adam, the Adam. And this is the first nuclear reaction in the Bible, because God split the atom. Yes. Too young? Oh, I wish. Yep. All right. So, everything's hunky-dory. We got a good world. We fixed the problem of the man being by himself. What could go wrong?
It's all her fault.
I prefer calling it the rebellion, although the fall is the most common.
Yeah, that's what Matt said. Yeah.
The most common way of saying it. There's this tree. There's a tree of life, and there's a tree of knowledge or knowing good and evil. And I put bad there because bad is the Hebrew word ra isn't morally charged like the word evil is in English. And back when William Tyndale or whomever first picked this word to translate it, evil also wasn't morally charged. But now it kind of has become morally charged, right? But you can use the Hebrew word ra to talk about, well, in the Joseph story, when Pharaoh dreams of the cows, the fat cows and the lean cows, the word is ra cows. They're bad cows because they were lean, and the grain was bad, right? Ugly, some translate it, but it's not. From the context determines whether you mean some kind of moral evil or just something that's like bad, like a bad dog, or you know what I mean? And I say that because the idea wasn't that humans needed to know evil, but they did need to know good from bad, right? So far in the story that the provider, who's the provider of good and bad? It's God, right? He's the one that's saying things are good, and he's the one that's saying this is not good. And What he wants is the humans to come to him to figure this out. In order to subdue the earth, they need to know, like, what's a good plan and what's a bad plan. Like, should we plant the corn here or should we plant the cedars here? Like, should we dam this river or not? I don't know what they would have done. Maybe damming a river is not something they would have done. But to expand the garden and to subdue the rest of the world, right? They need to know good from bad, like what's good and what's bad. The right way to do it, the wrong way to do it. And they're adult bodies, but they're children when it comes to knowing good and bad. They don't know the first thing about what's the best way to do everything. And God wants them to come to him for that. And that the tree of knowing good and bad represents a choice, whether they're going to reach out and take that for themselves, which is how the story describes it. She saw that it was pleasing, that it looked good, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that it would make you wise. And so she reached out and took and gave to her husband who was with her. And that was the rebellion. God said, trust me for that. They said, no thanks. We feel like you're holding out on us. We're not sure that you're going to, that you have our best interest at heart. They believed the serpent when he said that. So, that's the rebellion. And in this rebellion, lots of things go wrong. 4 things go wrong that I'll highlight. The first thing is they notice that they're naked, and they put on something to cover themselves. This image becomes fractured in 4 ways, and the first way is that it's fractured against itself, right? Shame is now something they're experiencing. Shame over themselves. The next one is their relationship with God gets fractured, right? The voice or the sound of the Lord comes in the wind of the day and says, where are you? Why are you hiding? And they're hiding because their relationship with God's been fractured. Third, their relationship with each other is fractured, right? It was the woman's fault. And you're the one that gave me this woman, God. Like, she's supposed to help me, and so, God, I think you did a bad job. And it was her fault. And she passes the buck to the serpent. And isn't that in a microcosm the common relationship between 2 humans, including a man and a woman, but 2 men with each other, or women with each other, or men with women, right? Leveraging each other, trying to get ahead at someone else's expense. This is a normal day of life on planet Earth, ever since then. And then the last thing that gets fractured is their relationship with creation. Right? The consequences that God mentions, the last ones have to do with it. We're going to go to that in a little more detail, and I am close to wrapping up. But the last bit of those consequences of that rebellion have to do with the fracturing of that relationship. So what do you think God wants to fix? Some of those? All of those? Yeah. So, let's go to, and here's where I'll ask you to pull out your, open or turn on your Bible. And go to Genesis 3, verse 14. I didn't want to put a whole bunch of slides about just these verses, so we're just going to read it. I might have a different translation than you. That's cool. Just kind of read along or listen and keep up. Everybody there? Genesis 3? Verse 14. I didn't tell you the verse. So these are the consequences. Then Yahweh God said to the serpent, because you have done this, you will be cursed more than any domesticated animal and more than any wild animal. On your belly you shall go, and dust you shall eat all the days of your life. And I will put hostility between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. And he will strike you on the head, and you will strike him on the heel. To the woman he said, I will greatly increase your pain in childbearing. In pain you shall bear children, and your husband shall be your desire, and he shall rule over you. And to Adam he said, because you listened to the voice of your wife. Whose voice was he supposed to listen to? And you ate from the tree from which I forbade you to eat. The ground shall be cursed on your account. In pain you shall eat from it all the days of your life. And thorns and thistles shall sprout for you, and you shall eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your brow you shall eat bread, until you return to the Adamah, the ground. For from it you were taken, for you are dust, and to dust you shall return. Strong words. Notice a couple things. He never curses the humans. He curses the serpent. He curses the ground. Or says the ground is cursed because of what he's done. Never curses the humans. Secondly, he works backwards. Right? The man says it was the woman. The woman says it was a serpent. So God starts with the serpent. And then he moves and tells, this is what's going to happen to you. And then he moves to the woman. And then he moves to the man. And so here's the promise. There's this character that I'll call the snake crusher. Some offspring, and then it says he, so it's like a singular someone is going to come along, and he's going to crush the head of the serpent, and he's going to be at war with the serpent and with the offspring of the serpent, but he's going to crush it, and kill it, but that he's also going to be killed by it. What does that mean? All right, a couple more things. I want to spend a few minutes on this because I think I misunderstood it until most of my life, until, 6 months ago. When you say, when you read, I will greatly increase your pain in childbearing, in pain you shall bear children, what do you think of? Labor pains. Does anybody think of something else, or at least hard work? Hard work, yeah. I thought labor pains my whole life. Like that was like the first thing. Maybe like next I think about maybe there's a little bit more to it than that, but I just. Any other thoughts, comments? Like what did you think? Were most of you thinking labor pains too? Or was it just me and Mike?
I was thinking that, but I was just thinking raising our children. Raising them up there.
Yeah. Yeah. So the first thing is that the word childbearing there means pregnancy. I'm not sure why it's translated childbearing, because bearing, maybe sometimes you can talk of bearing as in carrying in the womb. Maybe that's where it comes from or where it came from. But look it up in any concordance. The word means pregnancy. And it's part of a group of words that has to do with like pregnancy and conception. Right? So there's two areas here. One is conception, pregnancy, and then the other one is actual giving birth. Right? That's the bearing the children is bear as in, bear them into the world. So those are the two things. And secondly is the word pain, which I've highlighted there, is the same word in those three places. And a lot of translations say pain for the woman, but then say toil for the man. And I'm not sure why that is. But it's the same word. And I'll spare you, more verses or something. But if you look other places where this word pain, anxious toil and hardship are good translations. Like when it says, "In pain you shall eat from the ground," all that it's toil, it's hardship, but it's not just you're working hard, but it has something to do also with like anxiety and grief and worry. And the same thing goes for the woman's experience in getting pregnant, in being pregnant, and in giving birth. I'll start with the easy one, the men. How many of you can identify with it being anxious hardship to earn a living sometimes? And if we only knew how easy it could have been. Even the easiest, most I love my job person would have been like, this is way harder than what that would have been in the garden had we not rebelled. Ladies, how many of you can identify with there being hardship, anxiety, grief in conceiving, being pregnant, and giving birth? Yeah. Have you ever noticed how many main characters in women characters in the Bible are barren, and then God does something to like heal them? Sarah, I think Rebecca, if I recall correctly. Hannah, Samuel's mom, right? Elizabeth, John the Baptist's mom. And I feel like there's a couple others I'm forgetting. Rachel? Yeah, Rachel. That was the one. Yeah. So these are the consequences, and it's not saying that that you're going to have labor pains. It's just saying it's more than that. It's saying it's going to be difficulty. It's going to be difficulty. And same thing for the man. And the thing is that these consequences are going directly against the purpose or destiny of both of those people. Right? Just a verse or two later, it says that Adam named the woman Eve because she was the mother of all life. That was the idea. That she's the mother of all life, all human life. But now, because they chose to do things their own way, what happens? Giving life is toil and hardship. And the man is supposed to tend the garden and keep it. And together they're supposed to extend the rule of God out from the garden to the rest of the world. And what happens to him? Now this ground that was supposed to help him and partner with him maybe, it's just toil and hardship for him too. A normal day on planet Earth now. So, think this is my last slide. With apologies to John Steinbeck, he wrote a book called East of Eden, if anybody remembers that from grade school. His magnum opus is like his crowning masterpiece. And if you, well, it's a good book. So yeah, God says, man, this is not good. Now he's become, the humans have become like us, knowing good and bad on their own terms, and it would be really terrible if they existed in that state forever. Always fractured from each other, from themselves, from God, and from creation. And so he says, we don't want that to happen, for them to exist in that state forever. And they will if they stay here. So he banishes them. See, verse 24, he drove the man out, placed the cherubim. He went to the east. So that's why Steinbeck called it East of Eden. That's where we live today. Metaphorically speaking, we're all east of Eden, the land of darkness and decay. But there's this thing about the snake crusher. So yeah, that's how Genesis 1 through 3 sets up the plot. Here's what's going on in the world. Here's the problem. Here's a hint at what's going to happen to fix it. So we're left with, well, how is God going to fix it? How will he rescue his creation? Who is this seed, this offspring? When is he going to show up? What's this deal about him killing the snake, but he gets killed by the snake? Like, what does that mean? And what happens after that? Like, is that the end? Like, he just gets killed by it? And so the rest of the Bible starts riffing off of that. Like, who, and this portrait of the snake crusher gets filled out and gets, we all know, fulfilled in Jesus. And we tend to think of salvation a lot about the personal benefits, right? Most of the time, that's what the first thing we say when we talk to somebody is that, right? You've been separated from God. You need to reunite with God, and that is the first thing that needs to happen. But a close second is that our relationships with each other are also fractured. That's why we're supposed to love God and love our neighbor as ourselves. And that's why that's what God wants to do. He's still rescuing and redeeming us even after our relationship with him is restored. We need to have reconciliation with each other. We need to learn how to do all this stuff. And now, we're just like Jesus was a walking temple, a place where heaven and earth met. And now, Mike read the chapter about the coming of the Holy Spirit at Pentecost. And it's a clear reference to the presence of God filling the temple, right? Read the verses in Exodus and all that. The fire, the cloud, when Solomon's temple gets dedicated. And now here there's this sound of a wind. In Hebrew, wind and spirit are the same word. And there's this sound of a wind and these tongues of fire. And now there's all these little anointed ones, Christians, little Christs, not Christ, little Christians, that are walking, talking embodiments of where heaven and earth meet. And we go around like Jesus, trying to do good and heal all who are oppressed by the snake. So that's the story we're in. Did I lose anybody? No? This will set us up for later. What I want you to remember is just that you're in that story, because there's a lot of what the Bible is about is just retraining us how to think, how to view the world. So next time you're experiencing a fractured relationship, just go, man, but Jesus came to heal this. Next time somebody is like down on you, say, no, but I'm an image. I'm an image of God. And next time you think you're running up against something impossible, think, well, God wants to restore people. He wants to restore relationships. He wants to restore the world around me. And he wants to do it with me. He never wanted to do it by himself in either before the rebellion or after the rebellion. He even partnered with people to bring about the rescue. Like every time he does anything, he's partnering with people to do it. He didn't even save people on his own. He partnered with people, with Abraham, with Noah. And that's where we'll go next. All right? All right, let's pray.